Lies about movies used to spread like wildfire, and without any official way to disprove it, anyone from a sneaky kid on the playground to that drunk guy in a bar could spout nonsense about your favourite films, and for all you knew, they'd be right. Sure, there's an alternate ending to Raiders of the Lost Ark where the Ark burns the US logo off the box it's contained in. Oh, of course Blair Witch is based on a true story. Now, with the internet at our fingertips, you'd think it'd be easy to verify what's truth and what's a stinking lie. Oh, how naive. So with that in mind then, I'm Ellie with Whatculture here with 10 lies about famous movies you probably believe. Number 10. Snow White was the first feature-length animation. Snow White is the film that started it all. Disney had already found success with Mickey Mouse, but this was something bigger. The studio's first full-length animation was a major step forward for the company and the medium, grafting many of the conventions that remain in children's films to this day. But the truth? There had been plenty of animations before. It shouldn't cheapen Snow White of its achievement in terms of the impact it had on cinema, but it really wasn't the first. That honour goes to Pinto Colvig, whose feature Creation was released in 1915, a whole 22 years before Snow White. Like many smaller films from the time, it's been lost, presumably forever, but that doesn't hide the fact it, along with the handful of silhouette or stop-motion films that came out in the intervening years, beat Snow White to the punch. It's unlikely there was any bitterness though. Colvig went on to design the Disney logo and voice Goofy, so clearly he was welcome at the House of Mouse. Number 9. Man of Steel. It was out of character for Superman to kill Zod. Man of Steel was, to put it lightly, a mess, made more disappointing because there was clearly an interesting deconstruction of a character we all knew, hidden under the washed-out colour palette. It performed well, but not well enough to stop Warner Brothers going all in and enlisting Batman to save the sequel. One of the biggest complaints from audiences was the relentless mind-numbing action, all of which culminated in Superman snapping General Zod's neck. A travesty, this was one of the worst changes to the mythology Zack Snyder and co had made. But the truth? He's done it before. There were a lot of changes made to the mythology of Kal-El that felt forced just to give the story a new feel, but killing Zod isn't one of them. It's Batman, not Superman, who has that no-killing rule. Go back to Superman 2. The climax of the film has our hero depower Zod and his followers before throwing the general down a cavern in the Fortress of Solitude. If that is a murder, then the 80s clearly had a different moral code. Man of Steel made a lot of mistakes in trying to update the character, but the killing of an almost unstoppable villain who stated he'll destroy the Earth isn't one of them. Number 8. Harry Potter. J.K. Rowling told Alan Rickman Snape's big twist. The undoubted hero of the Harry Potter series is Severus Snape, the seemingly one-note potions master who, through a series of increasing reveals such as he was a Death Eater, Harry's dad bullied him, became the most well-rounded character in the films. This all culminated in the final moment reveal that all along he'd been in love with Harry's mother, turning 7 books and 8 movies worth of arsehole behaviour into hidden compassion. Of course, as the legend goes, Alan Rickman knew all this already. To convince him to take the role, series creator J.K. Rowling had told him all this way back at the start. But the truth is, she vaguely hinted at it once. We know Rowling does indeed plan ahead, with the first totally child-aimed book containing plenty of hints to later developments. Dumbledore's chocolate frog card mentions Dark Wizard Grindelwald, but more than that, we know she and publisher Bloomsbury were very tight on secrecy, which is why it shouldn't be surprising that while Rowling knew Snape would always be on Team Potter, Rickman certainly didn't. Number 7. Batman Begins. The Joker card tease is a direct foreshadowing for The Dark Knight. With films like The Amazing Spider-Man and its sequel so forward-thinking, planning ahead at the behest of the story at hand, it feels strange for a big blockbuster to not be setting up whatever may be down the line. So if a slight nod to the fans is made, we immediately jump on it as some deep foreshadowing. When Batman Begins, a film whose villains were previously untouched on the big screen and thus new to many audiences, dropped the Joker card in the final scene, it was clear to everyone that we were going to get someone a little more familiar the next time around. But the truth is, it was a little wink to fans, nothing more. Although what the card suggested would go on to be perfectly explored in The Dark Knight, Nolan never intended it to be anything more than something to get audiences thinking. At the point the film finishes, Batman has just established himself as the protector of Gotham, and a good visual cue to cement this is to show that the stories we're more familiar with from previous TV and film incarnations are just around the corner. Nolan is notorious for only ever focusing on one film at a time, so even if the card was intended to be something more concrete for the series, in his mind he was definitely going to be the guy exploring it. Number 6. Avatar. James Cameron was making Avatar for a decade. In an alternate reality of cinema, we got Avatar 10 years early. An idea he'd written a treatment for back in 1994, James Cameron's plan was to make the film immediately following his equally massive Titanic, but the limitations of the time meant he had to first work on getting the technology up to scratch. When the film finally arrived in late 2009, it was reported the director had been working on it for over 10 years, making this a stupendous achievement. But the truth is, he kept pretty busy in those intervening years. You know, this claim is greatly exaggerated when Cameron actually released a film in the interim, Ghosts of the Abyss, a documentary about the wreck of the Titanic. In fact, it was only after Abyss in 2003 that he began pushing on Avatar, and even then he was looking at other projects. The film wasn't greenlit and thus provided with money to properly push forward on the tech until late 2005, so in reality he was making the film for 4 years. Number 5. Psycho. The shower scene contains no actual nudity or violence. Psycho was such a progressive film that you could make a movie just about its clashes with the censors, and it'd be a damn sight better than the muddled Hitchcock. The first film to show a toilet flushing and also dealing with a psychological subject that could easily be sexually misconstrued. Oh, spoiler, the killer's a guy dressing up as his dead mother. The biggest point of contention was the shower scene. A series of rapid cuts depicting the stabbing of Marion Crane, the sequence is a masterclass of suggestion. Despite what you may think, you never see any nudity or actual stabbing. But the truth is, there's one shot that shows the stabbing. The claim, which was mainly made to get the film past the censors, that the shower scene is gore-free is easy to state when proving otherwise requires re-watching the whole film, which was difficult pre-home video. Nowadays, we can go through the Blu-ray frame by frame and see that actually there's one split-second shot of the knife penetrating Marion's skin. Very slight and devoid of gore, it's subconsciously a key contributor to the scene's shock factor. Number 4. The Truman Show. There's an official psychological condition named after The Truman Show. The Truman Show is about a guy whose entire life is in fact a TV show. His hometown is contained in a massive dome, his friends and family are actors, and the town's obsession with branded items is product placement. Everything that happens is overseen by a control booth in the sky, and it's all built so he'll never find out the truth. If that gets you questioning your own reality, then you'll not be surprised to hear there's an official name for that, the Truman Show delusion. But the truth is, it's a colloquialism. The word official may be a bit misleading. The Truman Show delusion is simply the name attributed to an existing condition. It doesn't actually appear in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. It's the equivalent of calling filicide the Star Wars condition. The notion of a person's life being part of a fabricated reality is an old one, and the TV show's specific subgroup formed part of a Twilight Zone episode, as well as sharing many elements in sci-fi writer Philip K. Dick's Time Out of Joint, people believing it is just an extension of the typical delusions of grandeur. Number 3. Planet of the Apes. Planet of the Apes is Earth. The ending of Planet of the Apes is so iconic that giving it away barely constitutes a spoiler. The film's final image is even on the cover of the DVD. But the truth is, it was planned to be a different planet. It may seem like an attempt to replicate the original's shock value, but the twist at the end of Tim Burton's remake, Mark Wahlberg returns from a non-Earth planet dominated by apes to discover the same thing has happened to our home, is actually much more in keeping with the original concept. Pierre Boulle's novel, off which the whole series is based, has Earth and the titular planet be two very distinct worlds, both on which the apes rise. It was only in early drafts of the film, written by Twilight Zone's Rod Serling, that the twist worked its way into the story, changing the scope of the franchise forever. Number 2. Titanic. Titanic is an inaccurate account of events. The main criticism, exacerbated by the centenary of the ship's famous sinking a couple of years back, tends to be aimed at Rose and Jack. Not their dialogue, in the broad scope of the film it works, but the fact that they didn't exist, taking focus from the real tragic events. Couple that with claims that the steerage passengers were never locked down below decks, and it all looks like one big expensive fabrication. But the truth is, outside of character-specific events, the sinking is spot on. Yes, those points are solid examples of James Cameron adding drama to already dramatic events, but for the most part, his take on the sinking is, for the time, pretty exact. The one big mistake the film makes is that it's now been determined the ship never stood vertical in the water. But as that was only figured out by a team containing Cameron no less after the movie's release, we'll let them off. Number 1. Blade Runner. Blade Runner has lots of very different versions. Is Deckard a replicant? It's one of the biggest unanswered sci-fi movie questions. Depending on which version of Blade Runner you watch, you get a different answer. Confusing audiences and critics alike upon initial release, the film has since become regarded as a classic. Noteworthy not only for its visual style, which is still imitated to this day, but the fact that there's so many different cuts of the film out there for fans to pore over for clues. But the truth is, it's all clever marketing. Do you know what other film has countless cuts? Every freaking film ever made. Few films, however, have the same studio interference as Blade Runner that allow for such a big marketing trick. Aside from 2 different director's cuts, one from 1992 and one from 2007, all the other versions are basically the same. They're either from different stages of production or feature slight cuts for international TV release. Ultimately, it boils down to 3 key differences: whether there's a voiceover, original release only, whether there's a happy ending, all pre-1992 releases, and whether there's the bit with the unicorn, the 2 director's cuts. Everything else is minor, and while interesting from a behind-the-scenes perspective, they don't deserve the mystique they've been given over the years. And yes, for our money, he really is a replicant.